Hello, America. Mr. and Mrs. America, thanks for being here for our inaugural program, our video podcast. People have said to me, Mark, don't you have enough to do? Actually, I do. But let me tell you this. I'm just tired of these podcasters. I'm tired of the whole cesspool this business has become. There's no need for this. I mean, really, do people want to watch podcasts where people just go off on Jews and Christians and drop F-bombs and smoke pot and so forth? This is the dark side of humanity. And I know they have millions of viewers and followers, but it is the dark side of humanity. And I got to thinking, we have such a great country. We don't even fully understand our history, the philosophers who the founders relied on to develop this country, to fight a war, to put it in place. Do we really understand what the Declaration means and the Constitution means? Do we really understand the threats that we face today based on what took place 100, 150 years ago? Do we really understand what populism means, or nationalism means, or Islam and Marxism, Hegelism, and all these other things? We're going to take our time and break it down piece by piece. So when July 4th actually comes around, we're going to be more patriotic and excited about this country than ever before, and we're going to defend it stronger than ever before. We have enemies within, and they are here, and enemies without. They're not all illegal aliens. Some of them are very wealthy people who were born into this country, third, fourth, fifth generation, who are advancing a radical agenda, a kooky agenda, but they have followers. Then we're electing people in our cities who hate our country, who reject our economic system, who attack our founders. We're pulling down the monuments of the very men who created this great country. There needs to be pushback. There needs to be a concerted effort, at least by me, to explain to anybody who will listen, of how fantastic this society is. And those of us who are born into it, we are the luckiest people on the face of the earth. And from time to time, I will have to dip into the sewer to address people who are in the sewer and have audiences who are trashing us, trashing our faiths, trashing our country. But my goal is to educate, is to inform, is to reveal to you information that may not have been revealed to you by elementary school teachers, middle school teachers, high school teachers, and certainly not colleges and universities. And I've spent decades on this, so this is going to take a process. This is going to take a little while. One piece will build on top of the next. Not necessarily each and every program. Sometimes I may have to move into current events. Sometimes I may have to move somewhere else. That's what we're going to do. We have the flexibility and liberty to do it. I'm very excited that you're here. I view the radio program, I view Life, Liberty, and Levin on Fox and this program as integrated in many respects. Different formats, different approaches, perhaps different audiences. Tell your friends and family if you like what you're hearing, even if you don't like what you're hearing. So that's the point of Liberty's Voice. Liberty's Voice is the voice of liberty. You, me, the American people. Let's get started with the Declaration. And yet our history doesn't begin with the Declaration. I'm starting there as a starting point. But during the course of the podcast over the next who knows how long, we're going to go to the beginning. That far precedes the Declaration, and we're certainly going to work our way up to today. So let's take a look at this Declaration, and let's not just view it as, oh, there's a few lines, yip-de-doo. Let's really dig into this. The relevant part, and there's a lot of relevant parts, but the relevant part I want to focus on is this. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Every word was thoroughly considered. At the Second Continental Congress, where the delegates were sent by the colonists. That's where this took place. The Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia at what we call Independence Hall. Independence Hall was the assembly room for the Pennsylvania legislature. The House of Representatives would meet on the first floor, and the Senate would meet on the second floor. Hence, the House is the lower house, and the Senate's the higher house. Anyway, let's get into this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That one phrase encapsulates the entire purpose of the revolution and the entire meaning of our government's establishment and existence. So it's worth breaking down, don't you think? Let's take a look at this. They talk about the Creator. Now, what's interesting to me is we're not allowed to talk about the Creator in classrooms today. That's God. And he's mentioned several times in the Declaration of Independence. If you go into a classroom today and say, I want to talk about the Creator, sorry, separation of church and state. Well, separation of church and state is not in the Declaration. It's not in the Constitution. It's based on a Supreme Court decision, about 70, 80 years ago. In fact, separation of church and state, a lot of people reference Thomas Jefferson on that. But Thomas Jefferson wasn't at the Constitutional Convention, even though he had input from afar in France, which he gave to Madison, but not often because of the distance. Now, what does that mean, separation of church and state? Separation of church and state means we're not going to create, enshrine, establish a government or country faith. That everybody is free to exercise their faith as long as they don't molest other faiths and other people practicing their faith. The Declaration is about individual liberty, sovereignty, individual sovereignty. And only when individual sovereignty is respected, recognized, promoted, nurtured, is a government legitimate. The government exists for the individual sovereignty, and the collective of individuals, which we call a society. John Locke, who we'll get to another day, so crucially important to the founders of this country. John Locke was the most important philosopher, most relied on by the revolutionaries, by the founders. During the constitutional period that would come later, it was Montesquieu. What was the basis of the thinking of both of these men and others who were relied on by your founders and the framers of the Constitution? The Enlightenment. These men were in the 1500s and 1600s, the Enlightenment. This is crucial. You have the Enlightenment, and yet the Declaration refers to Creator, God. What else does it refer to? We hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident. Well, truths are self-evident. That one sentence, it's not even a full sentence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Meaning every human being knows them to be true. Whether they follow them or not is a different issue. But if you use reason, or maybe intuit, certain principles and beliefs, every human being knows these truths to be true. For instance, the Golden Rule. Treat others as you would want yourself to be treated. Or the 10 Commandments, include thou shalt not kill, and so forth and so on. It doesn't mean every person will comply with it. There's evil people. There's evil regimes. It doesn't mean every government will comply with it. But their point is, we know this to be right. We know this to be true. These are truisms. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. What does that mean? All men are created equal. Well, that doesn't mean equal outcomes, because that would be inhumane. We're not machines. We're not to be counted like digits. We're individual human beings with our own DNA, our own flesh and blood, our own brains, our own motivations, our own minds, our own desires, individual sovereignty. So you can't have individual sovereignty and government-imposed equal outcomes at the same time, can you? Because that's not what they meant. It never even occurred to them. That would be tyranny, or what we would call today modern-day Marxism and so forth. Again, we'll get to that later. So we're talking about individual sovereignty, and yet you need to have a society. And John Locke talks about this. What's a society? It's these individuals with their own individual sovereignty that voluntarily agree to join together, what he called a social compact. You need rules to live by. You need laws, perhaps punishments for violating the rules and so forth and so on. And it's even broader than that. There's cultural issues, other types of issues, to bring people together to assimilate into this society where the individual and free will is cherished and nurtured. But there are certain aspects of it which require community decisions. That's why later on, in another program, we'll talk about the importance of the Constitution, why it's broken down this way. The Declaration is the basis for the construct of the Constitution. Separation of powers. What's that all about? We'll get to that. We'll get to that. The people who attack the Constitution also attack the Declaration, as they must. And the people who attack the Declaration and the Constitution reject our country altogether. But let's go on. I'm getting ahead of myself. So we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, meaning every human being has a right to live, has a right to free will, assuming they're moral and they're not violating societal rules, in other words, damaging somebody else's property or assaulting somebody else. So we mean in the rational framework of equal. And each individual should be treated the same way by the government under the same circumstances. What do we call that? Real justice. Your justice system should be applied as equally as possible. That they are endowed by their Creator, by God. These are God-given rights to every single human being, with certain unalienable rights. Unalienable, meaning what? The plain language. God gives you unalienable rights, meaning they belong to you. Nobody can take them. Voters can't take it. Dictators can't take it. No government can take it. They are your rights, given to you as an individual sovereign by God. That among these are life, the right to life, the right to life, liberty, free will, and the pursuit of happiness. That doesn't mean hedonism. That means to pursue what motivates you, using your intellectual and physical labor and abilities to pursue your own interests, to fulfill your own life's dreams. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. In other words, if we have to have a government, it's instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. From the consent of the governed. Again, the Lockean view of society and the social contract, the founders' view of individual sovereignty, of equality. Well, the only government that works and is aligned with that, or works parallel to that, or embraces that, is a representative government, where we, the people, each of us and us as a collective, are represented by those who we choose to put in the government to represent us. I'm not going to get into the Constitution today. We've got plenty on our plate right now. Now, this Declaration of Independence is one of the greatest documents ever conceived, ever. And one of the reasons we were able to have a Declaration of Independence like this is because we didn't have a big history in America. And America was the new country. Well, it wasn't even a country yet. It was the new place, if you will. So it didn't have a history of kings and queens physically ruling over it. It didn't have a feudal economic system. It never suffered the consequences of a Genghis Khan or Alexander the Great or what have you. It was not touched by any of the crusades that took place. It was basically a clean slate. a clean slate. Locke was asked, you come up with these ideas, which we call the Enlightenment, about the individual and so forth, and well, where has this ever existed? He says, America. It has and will exist in America. America. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there are contrary ideologies, and you've heard of one of them called Marxism. But people don't really understand Marxism. And again, in programs in the future, we're going to dive very deeply into Marxism. But for the purpose of our inaugural program right now, let's just touch on it. Karl Marx was a German. He wound up living in London because he was expelled from Germany because of his viewpoints and his belief system. Much of his early thinking came from a man by the name of Hegel. And again, if this seems a little overwhelming, we will get to that in future programs. Hegel. But Marx had this idea of what they call historical materialism. That basically materialism is the basis of all human thought, human activity, and human power. Materialism. Now, a footnote. Isn't that really what Bernie Sanders and Mondami and AOC and the rest of them talk about constantly? Affordability, redistribution of wealth, taxes. That's all they talk about. They never talk about faith. They never talk about the spirit. They never talk about Americanism. It's always about economics. And by the way, they're always wrong, but they always talk about economics. And in order to accomplish what they wish to accomplish, or what Marx wished to accomplish, you need an all-powerful, ubiquitous government. But they say you need it for the people. Marx split humanity basically into two classes, and later, when he was challenged, into subclasses of the two classes. The bourgeoisie, the powerful, the executives, the landowners, the managers, and the proletariat, the worker bees. And to put it simply, he basically said the worker bees surrender their power and their influence and their rights for a wage. It's not even a fair wage. But for their labor, nothing would exist. And so when it comes to equality, you need to redistribute wealth. You must destroy everything that came before. You must destroy this mentality that was born of the earliest times, ancient history, to feudalism, to what he called capitalism. He coined the word capitalism. It's the market system. But we'll play along. We'll call it capitalism because everybody else does. But he invented the word. He also invented this idea of class structures, the oppressed and the oppressor, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. And we're going to get into him in great detail, but not in this program. So let me explain this. He believed private property rights should be eliminated. It was the bane of human existence. He believed faith was mysticism. Your religious beliefs get in the way of a progressive, advancing society. Get in the way of humanity. These are the old ways. It's nothing but mysticism, and it stops you from growing as an individual, but more importantly, from society growing. So you need to eliminate religion. You need to eliminate private property rights. And he would later say in the Communist Manifesto, you need to eliminate parental rights. Because he said parental rights are based on this ancient belief system. Parental rights, on this ancient belief system. And it is carried through to the family unit. There need not be a family unit. And if we are going to have this brand new society where equality reigns, where everybody is equal and equal outcomes, we have to get rid of all of these old ways. Experience means nothing unless we learn to reject what came before. So experience means nothing, needs to be eliminated. History is misunderstood. It's about materialism and nothing else. All this claptrap, he would say, about natural rights, the creator, eternal truths, all of that must be removed. And he said in the Communist Manifesto and elsewhere, if that means a period of despotism, then so be it. As you and I know, he died in 1883, as I recall. Since Marxism has been in place, that period of despotism never ends, does it? What's the biggest problem with Marxism, other than it's defective every step of the way? It's defective because it rejects human nature. It tries to rejigger what God created. And so you have to destroy human nature. And in destroying human nature, you have to destroy human beings who those who run the country or run the party believe are not conforming, because conformity is the critical issue. Compliance, uniformity, equality of results. Human nature needs to be rejiggered, needs to be destroyed. How do you destroy what's in your brain? How do you destroy your thought process? How do you destroy your yearning to be who you want to be, to achieve what you want to achieve? And Marxism requires all of that. Regardless of what modern-day communists say, that's what it requires. The state is everything. And yet Marx says the state will wither away once we reach this panacea. After the Russian Revolution, Lenin, who led it, he said, Marx doesn't tell us exactly how to do this. Do what? How to institute Marxism. He doesn't tell us how to do this. So basically, we're going to have to do this our own way. And whether it's the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, whatever revolution that Marxism is involved in, that means mass slaughter, mass detention, a iron-fisted police state, and so forth and so on. Now, if you like this little clip that you just saw, please head over to YouTube and subscribe, or Rumble and follow, and tell everybody you know.